Okay, hi guys. Hopefully this goes. I tried it once before and I don't think it got all my slides, so hopefully this is better. My article this week, or my chapter, is the development of standards-based assessment in music, and it's by Fredeick, Burrack, and Kelly Parks from the Oxford Handbook of Assessment Policy and Practice in Music. And it was a very good chapter, very thorough and in-depth, as most of our readings are, probably all of them are. And I really learned a lot from it. And so I am going to do kind of I'm going to pick out the parts that just really jumped out at me, because there's no way I could do all of this in 8 to 10 minutes, let alone even an hour. So I will hit just a few salient points and give you as much information as I can. So a bird's eye view of the chapter talks about academic standards that are public statements of what children should be able to know and do, and that they're a formal learning experience and a result of being educated. And in the 1980s, there was a standards movement that attempted to make changes in education and make learning goals tangible, and to correct lax standards. And at the time, there was a movement with the nation at risk during the Reagan administration in 1983. And it grew out of accusations that public schools needed rigorous academic standards. And they wanted to create standards at the national level in order to help students. So kind of a new idea, but it also became a hotly contested issue in the education realm. And so the article addresses that a couple different ways. And so we probably know that anytime we bring up standards or standardization of anything, it becomes a hot button issue. And so then at the beginning of the article, they're making the point that standards have always been prominent in education, and they jump ahead just a little bit to 2014. So they jump from 1983 to 2014 and talk about the National Coalition for Core Arts Standards. And so they have a more recent statement about the importance of standards, and they talk about the central purposes of education standards, that they are to identify the learning that we want for all of our students, and to drive the improvement in the system that delivers the learning. So standards to ensure success for both educators and students in the real world of the school. And so the primary purpose of standards and assessments is to improve teaching and learning. And so the use of standards brings student learning levels up and serves both teaching and learning. And so we can think of it as a benefit to the teacher as well as the student. Standards show what should be taught and to what extent it should be learned. Lehman in 2014 proposed that standards and aligned assessments could lead toward greater transparency in grading. So this would allow teachers to justify the scores that they put on assignments, making it easier for students and parents to understand what had been graded. And so I think that's a great protection as a teacher. If you have that standard there, when you put a grade on an assignment, you have something to fall back on to justify that grade. And Lehman goes on to say there should be no mystery about what is expected of the student, about how it will be assessed, and no mystery about how to interpret the results. And so it being the student or the student's work. So I thought that was a great way to look at how the standards can help us in assessment just right off the bat. So purposes of standards help bridge the gap between curriculum expectations and student learning assessment, to clarify expectations, to guide curriculum development, and to communicate learning intent so students can know precisely what is expected of them and take ownership of their learning and define their learning expectations. Okay, so moving on to music specifically, So for music, there are essentially two categories of standards. There are content standards and performance standards. By the way, that's my daughter in that picture there. So she did play the cello at one time. So in music, both content and performance standards guide instruction and they guide assessment. Content standards have specific content areas, like maybe students analyzing the structure of music or a various work of music. Performance standards involve level of performance achievement at a given time, like at a grade level. All right, so standards, in the United States, was a very interesting part of the article to me because of the national or lack of education curriculum. So since we have 50 states, we basically have 50 different educational systems. That was something the article or the chapter pointed out. And so each state has its own standards and they are all acting autonomously. And within those states, we have 13,000 districts across the country. So that was something to kind of grasp mentally, to realize we have all these independent entities educating children, probably autonomously as well. So standards are accepted voluntarily, and in some communities, the music programs develop their own standards. And the first thing that came to my mind was, hello, Utah. And Richard Colwell, who has studied the politicization of assessment in music, is referenced in this chapter. And so Burrack and Marc are referencing him when they make this statement, where they say, if national and state standards are not descriptors of expected achievement across an educational system, then standards-based assessments will only provide meaning on a local level. And so they're talking about if we don't have an adherence to a national standard, then things are only going to matter locally. And that just really got my attention. So obviously I had to do the mic drop, and sorry I don't have a boom sound, but it just really surprised me. But it also makes sense with all the different educational entities that are floating around out there, in spite of a national standards movement. And Farrell kind of brings the point home as far as assessment and being a hot button issue. Assessment in standards-based curriculum frameworks is a highly contested area of school education. Some say assessment narrows outcomes of schooling. So when assessment is assigned too much responsibility, testing can take over and drive the curriculum. So this is referring to high-stakes testing, and so it's called into question for determining whether or not it should be used for arts-based education. And so there's always controversy when it comes to the arts-based education and assessment and high-stakes testing and where it kind of falls into that as well. So I'm sure it's familiar territory for much of us. All right, so interacting standards and curriculum. And so learning how to mesh those two. The article has some good tips and tricks and pointers that we can use in our teaching. And it progresses through ways that we can incorporate the standards into curriculum and in turn create a standards-based assessment. So standards in the arts must be specific enough to provide a basis for developing curricula, associated lesson plans, and assessments of student learning. And that's Neerman 2012. And the chapter also cites Gordon in that standards precipitate design and construction of curriculum. And they're citing Gordon there 2010, and I believe that's just a publication of 2010 of Gordon, because I don't believe he was around in 2010. So how teachers can or should plan specific learning outcomes associating with the standards. And learning outcomes should be used to design assessment and scoring devices. so this creates an interaction between the standards and the curriculum if we are designing assessment with the scoring devices. And one kind of important part of the article is where they talk about model cornerstone assessments, or they call it MCAs. And it's also part of the 2014 National Core Arts Standards, which was mentioned earlier in the article. And they are standards-based classroom assessments that teachers typically select, where they can select the scope and the sequence of standards taught. So it's a great tool that teachers can use in assessing and having that standard there and knowing how to put everything together. So the MCAs provide evidence of student work and curriculum. They illustrate levels of achievement, and they assist teachers in designing instruction. And they also help document learning, and they're helpful with use in instruction, and they have rubrics to help assess the standards. So that's very helpful as well, and very useful for self-assessment for the student and peer assessment. So a great tool to use in the classroom as well. So the crux of the article really is about educational accountability, and with the end goal of being how assessment reflects student performance, and putting all of it together with a standards-based approach and not just winging it as far as assessment goes. So the how and knowing if the assessment is going to be uniform, and this is obviously assuming there is equal opportunity. And they talk about equal opportunity for the student and equal opportunity with the trained teacher, and they really examined all kind of facets and opportunities both for teachers and students. So it was very well thought out as far as all the aspects that they took into consideration. So the standards and assessments need to be attainable. So not just something that's going to happen in the future, but something that we can do right now that teachers can do to improve their skills and teaching practices. Standards-guided instruction curtails poor assessment, so that's a great way to back up your teaching and to make sure your assessment is good. It also improves assessment overall and curriculum delivery and design. One caveat of individual differences in students is they cannot eliminate that variability in performance. The authors advocate professional development and support to encourage high quality instruction to improve one's teaching practices. And so that was a big push at the end of the article to help encourage people to improve their assessment and standards-based approach. So hopefully these are some good ideas that you can use in your teaching and get a lot out of the article, and you get a chance to give it a quick look over. I'm sure you'll glean lots of information. So I look forward to seeing your guys' presentations, and I hope you enjoyed mine.